Good evening, everyone. If you could rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation for February 2009. Before us, item 2 on the agenda, consideration of applications, routine applications. Madam Clerk.
Yes, we have SE 17 for the first selectman. The purpose is the acceptance of a grant for Channel 79 for $22,500. And I so move.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington. Second by Mr. Mason. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. I was able to inquire of Mr. Crumick if he was going to be available tonight. He might be joining us later this evening. Non-routine applications. I call on the Budget Chair, Michael Mason.
Good evening. ED8 is a Board of Ed Building Committee for the Hamilton Avenue Schools, an additional appropriation for $200,000 from the proper account code. And I so move that item on behalf of the Budget Committee.
Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Simon. Discussion.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mazza came in representing the Building Committee for what we hope will be the last interim appropriation for Hamilton Avenue School, although thank you very much. Although I think we might have said that in the past. This is for $200,000, and we had a detailed breakdown of the expenses that will be incurred on the project. And obviously, as you know, the school opened today, and hopefully we're on our way. And our vote was 4 in favor, 0 against.
With us this evening is Frank Mazza, Chairman of the Hamilton Avenue School Building Committee. Frank, if you would like to make any comments.
Not really. If I'm ahead, I'm not going to say anything. No, it simply, we assume, finally the school opened today, and I think kids were very happy at least, and I think everybody down there was happy, but obviously we need some more money. And what I would say is, let me say a couple of things. I think, unfortunately, the press keeps saying we're $6 million over budget, which is hardly the truth. And someday maybe they'll get it straight. I don't know. But we are over budget, no two ways about it. But the original price for the school, we estimated at $22 million. This is phase 2, the actual school building. The bid came in at $22,013,000. We had approximately left in our contingency fund at that point $600,000. What we should have had is around $2 million as a proper contingency of 10%. And the change orders to date are $1,672,000, which runs around 7.6%. So I think I'm trying to just make the point, the actual construction of this building is right on target, really, really should be. What has driven the cost so much is the delay. We have about $1 million in extra costs between architects, engineers, project managers, and utilities. And that's the thing that's really driving us way over the budget. But that's where we are.
Any questions for Mr. Mazza? I would note, as a member of the building committee, I was able to tour the facility on Saturday just to see the results, and we had our meeting last Tuesday, and the Board of Ed's staff was there. I know there were some town personnel there, and making sure that any health and safety issues, sort of cracked wood or anything of that would affect the children, were being taken care of, and it looked shiny and new, and some of the teachers had even already started on their classrooms early, so it looked great even on Saturday. So I'm hoping that the reports came back today and were positive. Certainly the art room in particular, going from art in a cart to such a large and nice spacious room, I'm sure had the kids jumping for joy. Any other comments or questions relative to Ham Ave? All those in favor of the additional appropriation signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Mr. Norton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that we suspend the rules to consider a gift of $85,000 from the Havemeyer Trust for repair of the Havemeyer building, and the money be subject to receipt of the $85,000 from the trust. It has been approved by the probate court to release the funds for this project, and I so moved.
The motion now before us to suspend the rules, take an item up that was not listed on the agenda. As most of you may know, I am hesitant always to take such an action, especially because the public hasn't been informed as to the action that we would be taking up. However, in this circumstance, it came before us in less than 24 hours because of the holiday to take this matter up, and I would argue that, in fact, there should be very little, if any, opposition to such a request, and therefore I would endorse such a motion. But motion by Mr. Norton, is there a second? Second by Mr. Simon. All those in favor simply to take up the item ED10 for an approval to use an amount of $85,000 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions. 11 abstentions by Mr. Stone. Mr. Stone, would you like to state your reason for your abstention?
I'm a trustee of the Havemeyer Trust, and I don't want to vote on this or any action to follow.
Okay. So the vote, Maria, 10-0-1. Now on the item, Mr. Norton, if you could just briefly again walk through the motion so that everyone understands what it is, and you should all have had blue sheets handed out and before you.
Mr. Chairman, the motion is to accept from the Havemeyer Trust the sum of $85,000 for the repair of the Havemeyer building and also repair of a section of the roof. And also that the receipt of the money, the expenditure of the money be subject to a receipt of the $85,000 from the trust.
Okay, so it's moved by Mr. Norton. Is there a second to the actual motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Simon. So, and I see that the Board of Ed is represented by its chair and vice chair and assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent. I get them mixed up. This is going to the RTM in March. And so the RTM would actually approve the gift because it's a gift from the trust. And you're looking for us to approve the appropriation so that you can spend the money. Correct? Okay. Subject to receipt of the appropriation. Subject to receipt of the funds to allow for the appropriation to be spent. Okay. Any questions either for members of the board or for the Board of Ed? Hearing none. All those in favor of this item signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions. Mr. Stone, for the same reasons noted before? Thank you. Okay. Finishing off with items 1 and 2 on our agenda, moving to item 3, the assessor's report. For that, Mr. Courtney. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You've had my report. Just a quick summary, we completed the grand list and signed it on January 30th. The grand list increased by 0.9% this year. And the Board of Assessment Appeals is accepting appeals, and the elderly processing has commenced. There were 2 special items on my report. The first one had to do with the revaluation progress, and I've been keeping you informed about the sales activity in town. In the month of January, there were only 9 valid single-family sales, whereas we usually get around 60. So the feasibility of having sufficient sales to do a credible revaluation is slimming with the time going on. The second item that I was to report on is the online access to the real property data. And I sent you a report last week that had examples and a narrative. And because not all of you were able to download it, I put a copy on your table in front of you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, so the way the agenda reads, just from a process standpoint, why don't we take the report and separate out the conversation regarding Property Max and the reval for 2009 for fiscal year 10-11 out of it, and first deal with any questions board members might have in the report, as we would customarily have, accept the report, and then move on to those two items. So any questions relative to the assessor's report, separating out those two items? Mr. Stone.
Ted, the slowdown in sales, which you expect is putting us below the level that you needed for enough data, is that something that had been set up when you originally planned the revaluation? In other words, do you have a bogey of a particular number or percentage of properties that you wanted to see changing hands during this period of time?
I had met with my committee on the revaluation, and we had pretty much had the figure of from October through June of there being 360 valid sales. And thus far, there's been, only around 60 sales for the whole period. We usually get about 600 sales in a year, valid sales, and it doesn't look like we're going to be anywhere near the 360 that we
Why
need.
this time frame, though? Because we had, since the last revaluation, several years of sales that preceded this, on which you could be making your decisions.
The market changes, and if you want to reflect the market changes, you have to really look at the most recent sales.
Okay.
The sales that occurred 2 years ago do not reflect the market value today. The market more or less peaked in the fall of 2007. So there had been value increases during 2005, 6, and 7. And then after that, they started going down throughout 2008 and into 2009.
So the norm in the, quote, industry is to take some recent segment,
Yes.
like you're focusing on here. Okay, and then from the standpoint of at what level is a new, I'll call it a new building, an improvement, or a new property construction valued? Is it based on neighboring properties and their existing assessments, or today's value?
All new construction is based upon what the value would have been under the guidelines of October 1, 2005. So if it's a brand-new building, we don't put on what it would cost to build and be selling for today. We'd rather look at what it would have been worth on October 1, 2005.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, Mr. Gortney, I had a question about, you have a statement in there that there have been 29 property splits and mergers processed since October 1st, 2008. Can you just put this into context, either, the previous similar period or for a full year? I mean, is 29 about average, much lower? Just kind of a context, and then also, do splits and mergers need to go through planning and zoning or approved by that office?
Whatever gets recorded in the on the public records, we deal with, but until it gets recorded, we don't make the change on the assessment records. In terms of the number of splits and mergers, for the whole year, it's typically around 120. This number is similar to what it was last year. There was a few more last year, but it's not down that much.
Thank you.
Mr. Norton?
Yes, Ted, the contract that we have with Total Valuation allows us for only a one-year extension without penalty?
Yes.
So if we were to make a similar decision this time next year, there would be a penalty incurred?
There could be. It would depend upon whatever legislation is passed and how that would impact the municipal option.
Thank you.
Other questions for the assessor, just on his report?
And isn't the penalty imposed by total valuation, not the state?
No, he's talking about changing state law.
Our contract with Total Revaluation allows us to extend it for 1 year. So if we extended it for 2 years, there could well be a penalty, yes.
Right. It has, so if the state, even, right, so the state passing legislation isn't going to get us out of the penalty.
No.
And one other answer to Mrs. Tarkington's question. You know, we try to take splits and merges that are processed and approved by the town, but, you know, the danger is that anybody can record a map that shows a property being merged with the town clerk, and we certainly don't want to be picking up maps that have not been approved by the town and reflecting that in our assessment records. So the answer to your question should be, we only take those maps, those splits and merges that have been recognized by another body of the town and not just filed with the town clerk.
Other questions or comments? Is there a motion to accept the assessor's report?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington. Second by Mr. Mason. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Mr. Gortney, if you now can discuss and update us on the Property Max internet access.
Yes, basically, you asked several questions at our last meeting. We did do a search of Fairfield County. We found out that 19 of the 23 towns currently offer online information. 2 of the 4 towns that are not currently offering it are considering offering it this coming year. So there's only really 2 towns that are not going to be offering it. One is Sherman and the other one is Shelton. The information on the assessment data is available also from Zillow.com. I don't know how many of you have used that service, but it basically gives the assessment information, plus it also gives you 4 aerial shots of the house where you can see the yard, the house, and the public access. We're proposing to not use the aerial photographs, and we've also proposed to delete the sketches and the confidential type information, and rather have just the basic information that's available from several sources, but have it convenient to the public so that they can access the assessment information when they're doing a comparison of sales for either wanting to understand their assessment or see how it's valued, or to consider an appeal before the Assessment Appeal Board, or to save a trip coming to the assessor's office to have to print out a bunch of records on our computer record file. We did meet with both the police and the law departments, and we followed their advice. We removed the sketches, we removed the aerial photographs, we did away with the owner's name search and the legal search. This will also, I think, be valuable for potential property buyers who are interested in buying in our town, because they can actually do searches of what properties are typically selling for in their neighborhood. And we think it will be something that will be provide a convenience so that people will be a better informed public. The other advantage and reason that we're interested in it is that our staff has now been reduced by 30%, and we're going to have a hard time servicing the public. And this should save a considerable amount of staff time. Right now, the public is having to come in and take a lot of our staff time in getting copies of public record, copy of our property record cards. So we're looking at this as being a way of eliminating some of our staff time that needs to be worked on other things. I gave you 4 reports that basically that show the list of towns and who's offering the information, a copy of the Zillow report, a copy of what our present format of our report will look like, and a copy of New Canaan as another town in Fairfield County, just to give you an all-around view of questions that you might want to ask. Be glad to answer any questions.
So just to back up, Ted, and this, for anybody out there, and I suspect that many of you are here for this item, we've received some email traffic corresponding to this. If, in fact, anyone has sent an email to me concerning this topic, that email has been passed along through our finance department to the members of the BET. So they have all received copies of those emails. Since Wednesday, you met with the projects team, which was created back in January of 2008, to go over the reval, and that special project team then morphed into also addressing this issue. You met with them on Wednesday, and then you met with them again on Friday to discuss this information and provide the information from other towns, from Zillow and the like, correct?
Yes?
And you intend to follow up with that special project team again before our next meeting?
Yes, we do.
And you've met with, I know you stated this, but I think it's important to reiterate, you met with the law department, you met with the police department, and you believe you've addressed their concerns. And one of those concerns was, in fact, taking the floor plans off of what was recommended for online accessibility.
Yes.
Just so that everybody understands the process more than anything else, at this time, we will not be taking a vote on this tonight. Certainly, it's open for BET members to ask the assessor any questions pertaining to what is available online. In all likelihood, this matter will come up at our March meeting, and you will be asked to essentially sign off on the information that's going to be available online at that meeting, although that agenda hasn't been scheduled. And so depending on how the budget works, that may also be pushed off. There's no time delay or time sensitivity relative to this information, and so I'd rather do it right than try to just hastily put it together. So with that, let me open it up to any members of the BET who have any questions for the assessor. I suspect that by the next time, assuming that it's being done in March, the special project team will have met again with Ted. You'll have a formal presentation then as to a delineation of the information that would be made available, and if in fact any member has a request to either eliminate or add information, that would be simply a motion by that member to either add or subtract the information at that time, and then to essentially vote on the package. Ms. Martin.
Mr. Gortney, my principal question, based on my review of, I looked up my own property on our website and on Zillow and read a lot of the emails, it appears that a principal point of contention is the inclusion of the property owner's name on the page. You can no longer search by name, but if you bring up my address, it's got my name on it. And there seems to be a lot of objection in town to having that kind of information identified. Can you tell me what the purpose is of including the name of the property owner?
Basically, it's information. Most people, I think, would like to know the owner's name when they're searching a comparable sale or something of that type. It is something that could be deleted if it were desired. We can delete any items that we need, that we decide that we do not want to show. At this point in time, it was our view that the owner's name is kind of a basic part of the record, and certainly you can find the owner's name for a property all kinds of other places, and you know, if you can find it all these other places, why shouldn't you be able to find it on the assessment record?
Mr. Simon.
Being one of the two members of the special team, we had set up this as a test database where members of the BET can
Yes.
have access to it.
Yes.
And do other people have access to it?
No, not unless they have the access codes, and the only ones that we've given it to thus far are the BET members.
We probably have to refresh our memories as to what it was. But I think, you know, over the next month, I think it would be interesting to be able to try different scenarios of data and let people access it and get people's, you know, board members' reactions to, well, this is a data set, let us know what you think, so people can try different concepts. So we just don't go here in March without people saying, well, I looked at this, or I thought that was good, or that was bad, or these are the search capabilities, or here are the data elements. And we can go through different scenarios over a time period that people can then look at. So as long as only this body has the code, and we may want to be able to send out the code again, that would be helpful.
Ms. Tarkington.
excuse me, Mr. Gwartney, I guess a couple comments here. I think, obviously, we all found out a lot of information from these meetings, and you've been most constructive and helpful. And I think in this process, you also have learned perhaps some of the information that's been available online. As an example, Zillow, I don't think, at the beginning of these meetings, or I guess prior to maybe the first meeting when we all got together, you weren't as aware of what was available there. Hence, when you met with the law department or the police department, they weren't aware that the aerial pictures were already available through another source. And as you're well aware, we have the GIS system and aerial shots of our properties. The question is, one question is, should we just consistently be using the aerials, which then doesn't add an additional piece of information, which is the actual picture of the properties, since that aerial is already there? And hence, I guess that would be one question that I would have is, should you go back or, just talk with the police department or whoever you talked about it to show that one point?
Let me answer that. We did meet with the police department. They were fully aware of the Zillow photographs, and they really didn't like them that much because when you have an aerial photo, it shows your yard, your access points, your driveways, your walkways, everything. And they felt that it would be much better to show the front photo of the house. Certainly a criminal would get much more from Zillow than they would from the assessment record, because on the Zillow system, they could get 4 different photographs showing every bit of the yard, everything about the house, the structure, the layout, the access, how to escape, everything. Whereas on the assessment records, we have a shot of the front of the house, and that's it. And it's just what a person would see driving by. So the police department were very opposed to our using the Zillow photographs. The law department also was opposed to our using the Zillow photographs, mainly because they could not get consent from Microsoft to use them.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply to use theirs. I meant to imply to use the GIS that we use here in the town, and that a resident can go downstairs to the GIS department and print the aerial or whatever of their own property. My second question relates to consistency of information. I always like things that are very consistent. And I remain baffled why they might request that you provide less information on commercial properties, including no picture and less information about the interior or description of the property than you might of a residential property. So again, it seems to me to be consistent. Either we provide more on the commercial properties or less on residential properties. And I guess I'd like that to be further pursued if possible.
Okay.
Mr. Simon, hold on, I'm going to make sure that there aren't others before coming back around. Before Mr. Simon speaks, Mr. Raymer, go ahead.
You indicated that you're going to be removing the schematic shape from the Internet Available Assessor's Card. And whose recommendation was that?
The police department.
Looking at the timeline here, just so people can get a sense of where this would head, Mr. Simon brought up a good point. I think in some regards, using it and using the access code is helpful to understand exactly what the information is there and how it can be manipulated and searched, and getting a better sense of that. I would suggest, in order to give the special project team a sufficient time to deal with this, that any comments be made either by Monday the 9th or by Friday, that would be the 6th. I'm not sure it really matters whether it comes in that Friday or that Monday, but then that would give that special project team that week before the full BET meeting on the 16th. And then don't forget, we have the public hearing on the 17th, so then that revs up the budget process again after decision day on the 24th. So just trying to have everyone focus, because you're going to have to switch gears and then focus back on this issue. And with that, I think, we should probably get in trying to set our own budget and close the gap every time we were to use Zillow. We should probably get some fee from them for advertising. Mr. Simon.
now paid more attention to the assessor's report, which was kind enough to print the previously unknown password and site name, maybe we could change the password, since this is a public document. And the password's in there.
Yes.
So in order to limit the access to what we're going to do to the BET, it would be nice if you would change the password and send it to us.
All right.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments for the assessor at this time? I will just underscore that if you can please, after you send out the new password tomorrow morning, please use it, please manipulate it, manipulate the search capabilities so that we can have, so that everyone fully understands what it is that we're going to be voting on or presumably voting on in March. Okay? Thank you. Mr. Guarney, if you can then move on to the next topic, which is the reval for this year for 10-11.
Yes. Basically, we do a statistical model, and in statistics, you have a number of sales to make a valid statistical model. And we have to have it within a fairly tight time frame, because if we went back 3 years, we'd be looking at values, for example, that have just changed dramatically in the last year. So ideally, we'd like to do the modeling when we have enough current sales so that we can do a solid model that the public will understand and will give us good statistical results. And we're saying that it would be better to do this instead of April or May or June of this year, to perhaps put it onto the fall or early next year. At that time, we'll have a large enough volume of sales where we can do modeling and do a better estimate of the market value of houses.
After meeting along with the special project team on this issue, briefly had a conversation, and it was interesting whether or not this would be an actual resolution. Ms. Barton actually raised the point of, I'm not sure that we had a resolution to say that we were going to do a reval in 2009, and so you wouldn't have a resolution to undo having a resolution or a reval in 2009. I think that's correct. And so our informal policy, at least, has been to do a reval every 4 years. That would set it on course for this year. I guess at this point I would simply entertain a motion to put off the reval until next year, if a member so chooses to make that motion.
I'll move that, or do you want Larry to?
Moved by Mrs. Tarkington. We'll get it right someday.
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion on the motion to formally move the 2009 revaluation for fiscal year 2010-2011 to October 1st of 2010. Mr. Norton.
Mr. Chairman, I think I support the motion, and I think it's a good idea to have the motion because it clarifies what our intent is. So I think by having the motion, everybody will be clear that we're not going to do it in the fiscal year 2010, or the year going forward from July 1st, 2009 to June 30th, 2010.
Mr. Finger.
I too support the motion. However, the question I have, Ted, is in the event we wait this additional year and we still find ourselves with a small sample, if you will, of home sales, and the state does not extend the 5-year time frame for revaluations, what happens then?
It is possible to do modeling where some mathematical models are made that give estimates of or proxies for sales. This has been done successfully in a number of jurisdictions. It's not the desirable way of doing it, but it is a way of doing it if the sales market just dropped off entirely, coming up with proxies of sales, and that would give you the ability to do modeling.
Mr. Raymer.
I'm not understanding what a proxy of sale is.
it's almost like hiring fee appraisers to go out and do very precise appraisals of the vast categories of types of properties that there are, so that you build a statistical model based upon the best information possible on professional advice. And that would then become not a real sale price, but a proxy sale price. It would be like an appraisal price. It's not the way I want to do it. It's not the way I'm proposing to do it, but I was specifically asked, what if there are not sales? There are alternative ways of accomplishing it.
Mr. Simon?
And I think it's important that we take the vote. I support the motion because we're making budget changes based upon the assumption that the revaluation will not occur until October 1st of 2010. And I think we will get a much better revaluation in that time period than we will today. Thank you.
Ms. Spartan?
I don't think I ever objected to making a motion on this. It was another point that I challenged, but my question is whether the fiscal year is correctly stated on our agenda. If we have a revaluation on October 1st, 2010, wouldn't that be for the 2011-12 year?
It would be for taxes levied in 2011 and 12, yes, but it would be budgeted in the prior year.
The agenda, I think, is a little confusing. It says vote on the October 9 revaluation for fiscal year 2010-11 to the revaluation of October 1st, 2010 for fiscal year 2011-2012.
That's fine with me. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions pertaining to this motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. Thank you. Item 4 now comes before us, BET committees and special project team reports. You should have received written reports, including the Audit Committee's report, the Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee's report, the OPEB Trust Board report, the Ad Hoc OPEB report, the Havemeyer Downtown Project report, the Human Resources Committee report, and the Hamilton Avenue Building report. I think I just lost our audience. Was it the It was the Ham Ave Building Committee report, wasn't it?
Mr. Chairman?
I thought you guys were here for the OPEB account, but I guess not.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Norton, yes.
Because the Glenville School Building Committee met this morning, I wanted to combine both reports for the January and February meeting, and they have been distributed tonight on the table. And I have one small addition to make to that report. It was reported at our meeting this morning that we're approximately 32% complete with the Glenville School reconstruction.
Are there any questions pertaining to these reports? Mr. Simon?
I'm not sure I got the Hamilton Avenue Building Committee report.
You didn't.
Did you?
This,
Or did I just
I
hear
get it, I think, on a daily basis.
Or did I just hear it?
You heard it.
All right. I do have comments on one of the items, which is the third item, the OPEB Trust Board report. Normally, I don't comment on these things, but being a member of the board, I will comment on this. I only commented on it from the following point of view. We established a board that has, as laid out in the trust document, exactly 8 functions. I could read them if you want. But one of the responsibilities of the trust board is not to recommend to the BET what the funding contribution should be for the OPEB trust. And so I'm reluctant to have, boards that we establish do things outside of their charter. If I were at the meeting when they voted, I would have voted against this, not so much on the merits of whether or not we should be funding the OPEB, which we're going to discuss in the Budget Committee, but on the merits of whether or not a board which is set up should only stay within the responsibilities given to it.
Mr. Stone?
I guess I'll respond in several parts. Number one, Mr. Simon knew full well over the period of several months the intention of the board, the trust board, to take up this item. In fact, we taken it up in November specifically, and then we discussed it in February, because in November we knew we were going to require additional information, which was going to be, let's call it, digested over the interim period. And then during the February meeting, this was an agenda item. It was discussed at some length before Mr. Simon, because of a prior engagement, left the meeting. So I don't believe it's accurate to say that he would have objected. He didn't object during a fairly large number of opportunities to object to consideration. Now let's get to the fundamental issue. The OPEB Trust Board took up this issue, and we invited other Finance Board members at large, and specifically told them that this issue was going to be discussed and possibly voted on at the February meeting. We did have the participation of two other board members, Mr. Finger and Mr. Norton, who participated in the discussion, not the vote, but the discussion. And then finally, if the trust board didn't take a position on this, and it's a position, only a recommendation, there probably would have been no other opportunity prior to finally this board's meeting over the, let's call it the next several months, for this issue to have been deliberated as it was at that particular trust board meeting. So it was an opportune time. It clearly is non-binding, but it was an opportunity for several people who are reasonably close to the issue to arrive at a recommendation. That's what we did. Thank you.
Inasmuch as there's no action before us, I'm going to cut off debate except to say that I think before us tonight, we're going to see a request for the acceptance of the standard plan document for the OPEB account. I think at this point it is important to ensure that the OPEB ad hoc committee has fulfilled its obligations to look at that, to see if in fact it's appropriate to disband that committee, to look at the trust, and to ensure that there is a process by which going forward we have a formalized process to nominate trustees of the trust, and I think that's a direction we should be headed into, and make sure that happens once again after focusing on the budget process that's before us. So I would expect to be doing that over the next several months to effectuate that change. Turning now, unless there are any other questions regarding any of the other reports, moving to the comptroller's report. Mr. Mynarski.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BEG members. The Comptroller's report was sent out electronically, and I put out a hard copy, and hopefully you've had a chance to read it, and I'll answer any questions at this time.
Questions for the comptroller? Mr. Simon.
I just want to remind the controller of the process we've established with regard to reviewing the investment managers of the retirement board, in this case Wellington Trust Company, that this also be referred to the investment committee on a timely basis. So if this comes to us in March, they will have had adequate time to do their review.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Mynarski, it's not in your report, but I saw an email from the first selectman through the first selectman from our state senator, Scott France, regarding reimbursement for Board of Ed projects. Regarding legislation, or now would be the appropriate time to potentially put in requests Did you have an opportunity to review that, either legislation or that email, to see if in fact?
I do recall parts of it where they were going to make the range from 20 to 90% down to, I think, 15 to 65%. But I also thought that it had to do with projects after June 30th, 2010.
Okay.
It's my understanding that the Glenville project would be in and covered at the 20% rate, unless someone from the Board of Ed has something.
It's for those starting in 2010.
Correct. So,
I just want to make sure there's a follow-up,
Sure.
not necessarily looking for responses on the merits of it, just to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks, and that if, in fact, you've looked at it to make sure that, and you've had communications with the Board of Ed to see if, in fact, there's money out there. So if you could just make sure that that's done, that would be helpful. Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, Mr. Minarski, I had a question again, just to understand the marginal costs as we put new buildings online and so forth. Do you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but in your report, you have the total insured value for the new Hamilton Avenue School of $25,600,000. Would you by any chance know what the previous insured value of the old Hamilton Avenue School is? I know it was a long time ago, but perhaps you could just email that to us, or
Sure.
just give us an idea at some point in time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions for the comptroller?
That's one more.
Mr. Simon?
So what happened on February 11th with the insurance brokerage RSPs? Have we decided where we're going? Are you reviewing them?
the answer is, I got the package probably 4:30 on Friday, and the range was from 60,000 to, I believe, 260, and we will be reviewing them. One of the options is to retain Kerma at no cost, which is not in the range. They bid each year, and their cost is incorporated into it's into the premium. So the answer is yes. We're in the process of reviewing them.
And when will you make a decision?
Assuming that we probably would make a change as quickly as possible, because the new vendor would have to learn the Town of Greenwich's liability auto property program, and would have to be working on it as quick as possible. And I would guess probably in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Any other questions? Is there a motion to approve or accept the comptroller's report?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Norton, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Simon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions, 11-0-0. Moving on to item 6, the treasurer's report. I keep waiting for the numbers to go up. I'm still waiting.
Which number
At
is
some point, they're going to have to go up.
Is there a motion to approve the treasurer's report?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Norton, second by Mr. Mason. Questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions, 11-0-0. Moving on to item 7 on our agenda, approval of BET meeting minutes for January 21st, 2009. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Approved. Moved by Mr. Mason,
Second.
second by Mr. Simon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions, 11-0-0. Officers' report, Mr. Stone?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Tarkington?
Okay.
February has been an interesting month. Certainly one that has taken up a considerable amount of time and energy. I don't think I can count the number of conversations and meetings with the first selectman regarding the layoffs, and I can honestly say that certainly the hardest conversations that I've ever had to deal with in my experiences in town government. not to diminish the absolute devastating effect on the employees, but I can sincerely tell you that we have a first selectman who takes into consideration the employees of the town and the effect that the layoffs had. Clearly, the timing of that was interesting relative to the Budget Committee meetings, and I would like to thank the HR committee or the HR department for listening and taking advice and trying to make sure that layoff plan was carried out in a respectful manner. Obviously, our work is in full swing at this point under the guidance of the Budget Committee. I appreciate all of the members who attended, whether it was for 1 hour or for an entire day at the Budget Committee meetings. I think it's important that people hear the conversations, and I hope that we're doing a better job at making sure that people can hear the conversations and that comments are taken so as to ensure that come decision day for the Budget Committee, there is an understanding, at least, maybe not a full agreement, but an understanding as to the decisions that are being made. Their work will continue, obviously, this week with Consolidation Day, and then Decision Day, or days, next week. If I was a betting man, I would say it would be Decision Days next week.
How much?
I said if I was a betting man. This week, I'm scheduled to meet with the First Selectman in the Greenwich Library. They're going to be issuing a report. Did you know I was coming with you? They had called me last week and asked me if I would attend. They're simply giving us a presentation on the Peterson Fund, the status of the Peterson Fund. I can't expect that it's going to be great news. And I'm also, at this point, tentatively scheduled to meet with the Board of Realtors on the online information issue. Which I should also add, it was good to see the level of participation. I think there was a bit of misinformation when this issue first got out there. Hopefully we've answered many questions here tonight, but it's always good to have an audience here. Not that Mr. Morzeau isn't enough, but it is nice to see others here listening to our presentations. February 18th, this is my plug for the Board of Ed. February 18th is a secondary review at the Greenwich High School Media Center, and then February 24th is the technology review, I believe also at the Greenwich High School Media Center. I at least know through their notification, I think you all have received it, that they would like to see one member from each district and a member of the BET, and so I would encourage you to attend that. If you are going to attend either one of those, if you could please email me just to let me know you're going to be there. I'm trying to make sure that we have at least somebody there for that coverage. And I think at that point, obviously after the budget, we'll go into March and then deal with our own public hearing and the like. Mr. Kelly.
This is probably out of order, but it's something you just brought up, that you're having a meeting with the library board with Mr. Tessie. And I would just think in these times, the libraries might consider extending hours. There's a lot of people looking for work. There's a lot of people that need access to a library. There's a lot of people that need the internet. And as we cut back on other things, the library may be something where, if there is flexibility in hours, it might be something that should be considered by them in these times. So, just a thought.
Thank you. Item 10 now comes before us, new business, acceptance of
Mr. Chairman, before
Mr.
we
Norton.
get there, I believe this would be old business, but it could be new business. On the report that we received, I believe it's a cash flow report. If I read this correctly, it says that we only have, what's the amount in the STIF fund? And does that imply that we have taken that down?
It should be negligible.
It looks like, is it 14? It must be, is it 14,000 or 1,400? No, I don't see it.
$14.
be 14.
That would be $14.
Now, I thought there were 11 sub-accounts or 10 sub-accounts for STIF,
Yes,
so we've taken everyone down to about $1.
yes, but every once in a while, there's a grant that goes through there, and I
I
think,
realize that, I think that's what happened the previous month, but my real question is there a minimum we have to maintain?
no,
So we can't take it down to $1 in each one of the sub-funds?
you could probably, yes, you could take it down to $1.
Thank you.
Down to-
How's item 10 now look like? Can we go on?
Thank you.
Item 10, new business, acceptance of the assessor and the comptroller evaluations. Bill Finger and I met with both Mr. Mynarski and then Mr. Gwartney to go over their evaluations, subject to approval by this body. My understanding is that step increases tied to performance are approved by this board for these two individuals at the January meeting, February meeting this year, and that any COLA or cost of living adjustments would occur in July, once again, subject to budget deliberations and any discussion regarding a freeze of such a COLA increase. So the evaluations, excuse me, you received via email today, and in the coming weeks, if you could also email me your comments as to this year's process. As you know, we changed this year's process. I don't know if you think it worked or if it didn't work, but I'd like to hear your comments relative to that process. And so if you could email me over the next couple of weeks, that would be helpful. The first matter to come before us is the evaluation of the comptroller, along with the following resolution. Resolve that the comptroller's salary be increased by one step from $161,613 to $167,437, effective January 1st, 2009. Can I have a motion to that effect? Moved by Mr. Finger.
Second.
Second by Ms. Tarkington. Discussion. Mr. Simon.
So do we expect all MC employees to have steps this year? Or do we not know that? Or are we going to be out of step with the other people's steps?
I believe anybody who received a step, I think it's only the elected officials that receive steps in January.
The increases are concurrent with the term. So the selectmen's term is December 1 to November 30th.
And so you received your step December 1st,
I believe, right.
right? And all the other MC employees, I believe, either received their step
In July
July
1st,
1st.
The other
2008.
two elected people, the collector and the clerk, are January 1 because their terms are January 1 through December 31.
right.
They just get GWI.
Right.
Do you get a, you don't get a step.
GWI, which you had set, I think, in two budgets. You look in your budget book for the current year, it was laid out for the 6 or so elected positions, including the registrar of voters, so it just happened.
All I'm trying to do is avoid us being out of, I hate to use this word, step with the rest of the MC employees. So I'm going to support the resolution, assuming that they approved, could you give us, are we going to discuss their reaction to the evaluations or not? Were they thrilled?
I don't think we've ever discussed their reaction
All
to
right.
it.
Then we won't.
Mr. Finger.
I'd just like to point out that the reason why the step is effective January 1 and we're at February 17th is we've been late in actually doing the evaluations, and had we been more timely, there would not have been the need to make it retroactive to January 1st.
Furthermore, I think if there is in fact a freeze that is endorsed or recommended by the first selectman and then carried out by the budget committee, then in fact the salaries would remain at that frozen level without any cost of living adjustment increase.
May I address that publicly, because, good evening. I think it's important for you to hear again what I've said previously, particularly in the light of the fact that last week, as you mentioned, several employees lost their positions here with the town. I have called for an across-the-board wage freeze for the elected, the M&C, and all of the unions. We are in the process, a very tedious process in terms of communicating and hammering out the provisions agreement with the various 9 or so collective bargaining units. I think the Board of Education is working, and I don't want to speak for them, but the last conversation I had with Mr. Anderson is they're working on parallel tracks. I just want to be crystal clear. You set the increases. We fill the positions. I've said publicly, and I'll say it again, certainly I expect it to apply to everyone. There's a lot of misinformation there about it. I've received feedback from several of the departments who report into me and some that don't, that they certainly welcome that. One department head of an appointing authority offered a 1% salary give back. So in terms of casting this in the proper light, I understand what you need to do, but the realities are, in light of the severe circumstances, everyone is willing to contribute and show empathy to this situation. And we've asked for that, and as I said, it has to be across the board in order for it to be effective, in my opinion. Otherwise, you're going to get further loss of morale, candidly. And I think in order for it to be effective, it has to be across the board, one for all and all for one.
Comments? Ms. Spartan?
Well, my question then is, what is happening with all the MC employees right now? Are we awaiting the outcome of labor negotiations?
The MNC receive their increases typically in the bulk of them in actually July. So come July, my recommendation is they don't receive them. Now, granted, I have limited authority because only 10 or so people report directly to me. I think I can effectuate those salary freezes, but I can't necessarily legally, I believe, impact the folks who report to you. I think you ultimately determine it by the fact you have the power to appropriate and make the resources available, and also you have oversight. But that is the position that I've put out there to everyone. And again, I sent that out to the department heads, and they themselves, by and large, have responded very positively.
Would the wage freeze for the MCs whose appointing authorities agree go into effect on July 1st? Is that your plan?
Correct. Just as we're looking at the wage fees for the unions to be the wage increase as of July 1 of '09. And we're looking at a figure somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.6 million if everyone were to agree to this, which is a considerable amount toward alleviating the projected shortfall. And in combination with the position layoffs, we should be able to close the gap that's necessary to keep the mill rate increase at the levels that you have expressed in your guideline.
Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, I was just going to comment, to the best of my knowledge, the only 2 MC employees that didn't have the opportunity for a step increase at July 1st were the 2 that work for the BET, who's in the same fiscal year become effective in January 1st based on the year that they're in. So I just wanted to make this comment. They weren't eligible for any step increase last July 1st because their evaluation and their opportunity for a step increase is effective January 1st, again, within the same fiscal year.
Any other comments? Mr. Kelly?
Help me. The M&C in town start their new cycle July 1st, but the 2 who report to us start their cycle January 1st. Is that the difference that we're discussing here?
For their step, not their...
For their step.
Not their COLA.
All right. Is there a reason for that, or It's just,
Infinite wisdom of prior BETs?
okay,
Charter, I think.
Charter?
It's in the charter.
okay. Because we're revamping the whole way M&C are paid starting July 1st, correct? On a performance-type system.
Well, and currently, one could argue that the current MC compensation plan is based also on performance.
One has argued, I've heard.
So,
I'm just concerned from what Mr. Tessie said about impact on the rest of the town if we went through with these raises. And I guess.
well, I
through-
think this is wholly consistent with, first of all, I think to follow up on Mr. Finger's comments, first of all, we would have taken this up in January, but for the new process and the delay. So
Okay.
first of all, it would have happened
Right, January.
And on top of that, this does not affect COLA. If there is a freeze, COLA would kick in.
Okay,
And in fact, it would be frozen as opposed to getting the double bump that Mr. Mynarski would have normally have received.
the pickup in July.
That's right.
Okay,
So I think if in fact there's a townwide freeze, then both, and the BET were to agree with that relative to just the two individuals, neither Mr. Mynarski nor Mr. Gortney would receive an increase July 1st, which right now, they are on track to receive increases on that date.
okay. All right, so that would, if we decided that, that would be in the spirit of the first selectman. Okay, all right, that's what I wanted to know.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Norton.
Section 11 of the charter indicates when the controller should be appointed by this board for a 2-year term at the meeting at which the chairman is elected.
Thank you. Mr. Simon.
So, I'm going to vote for the resolution, but with the following thought, that if in fact there is a freeze for the MC employees, that we actually honor that concept next January, that the rate, the salary we give this January, we would in effect put our own freeze in 6 months later. I think that's fair. I think they've waited a long time to get this salary increase. But I think if everybody else has their salary frozen in July, they also should have their salary frozen then for 1 year in January of 2010. And the GWI will play out for everybody as it does in July of this year.
I think that makes sense, and I think you could also effectuate that change and put an exclamation point on it through the budget process by only budgeting this amount for the entire fiscal year.
That was my concern. Okay.
Spartan.
I have a bit of a different view, which may seem unfair to the two employees in question, whom I value highly, and whose evaluations reflect that. But I don't think this board should be in the position of granting a salary increase to anyone under its jurisdiction at this point in time.
Other comments or questions? I'll just read the resolution again so everyone has it. It would be the approval of the evaluation and resolution that the comptroller's salary be increased by one step from 161,613 to 167,437, effective January 1st, 2009. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Abstentions? 10-1-0.
Mr. Walker?
Ms. Barton?
I would like the record to reflect that my opposition is simply to the pay increase and not to the evaluation of the employee.
Thank you. The next evaluation to come before us is for the assessor. This one's a bit easier. Mr. Gortney is at his top step, and so it would be for the approval of the evaluation and following resolution that the assessor's salary remain unchanged at $124,561. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Finger, second by Mr. Mason. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. OPEB resolutions now come before us under new business. For that, I will call upon Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The resolutions are before you in a hard copy. They're the outcome of the votes taken at the ad hoc OPEB committee meeting on the 17th, on the 12th of February. And they are as written, and I so move.
Moved by Mr. Stone.
Second.
Second by Mr. Simon. Now, Mr. Stone, you're proposing these as one vote for the two resolutions, correct?
They can be split, but from a simplicity standpoint, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be combined.
Is there any objection to the combination of those resolutions? Any other discussion on the resolutions? All those in favor of the ad hoc OPEB committee's resolutions signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Mr. Stone, now, the third item under new business comes before us. The OPEB standard plan document comes before us.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that document was prepared under the direction of the HR committee. It was submitted to the ad hoc OPEB committee and distributed to all members of our finance board with a request for comments by a particular date. There were no outstanding, there were no comments that came in. Plan document, hard copies, and I so move so that be accepted.
Moved by Mr. Stone. Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion? I just have a question on formatting, and I ran into this trouble with the evaluation. It appears that document too, to try to change the what appears to be page breaks. And this one, if you look on page 8, Article 2 seems at the bottom. I know it's not necessarily a question for you, Mr. Stone, or Mr. Simon, or anybody else who's a member of the OPEB ad hoc committee, but I think that at least if HR, does this reside in HR now?
The document and any preparation of let's call it updated documents is under the control of HR, yes.
Could Finance request a finalized version that would be the one that would be going out to the employees if one requested the plan document? Any other questions or comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Mr. Stone, are you doing the actuarial report as well, or is that through Mr. Mynarski? Are you presenting that? The two actuarial reports? I'll get it right.
Want me to present?
Sure.
One at a time.
Please.
The actuary Hooker and Holcomb presented the report in draft form last Thursday to the BE Budget Committee, and most BET members were in attendance. The draft copy was finalized, and you will have a copy of it, the final bound copy, in front of you. And I'm asking for the BET to accept the finalized copy so that I can file it with the town clerk's office.
So I think it's important that the one item that the BET Budget Committee voted on, which really this full board has to accept, is that we voted on page, well, it shows up on 3. On 3, which is the level, I'm just trying to find the page within the...
Level going, 3.
That's it. Page 3. We voted for a level dollar amortization of unfunded accrued liability as opposed to a level percentage. And that's the number that's on page 3 of the $3,368,010. And the difference between these two numbers was about $1 million. This one being the higher of the two, and we felt was more fiscally responsible. And that's why we voted for this particular funding method.
Just for the public's knowledge, because the Budget Committee meetings are not televised or are at least at this point not televised, there was an extensive discussion regarding that methodology and any alternative. Comments or questions? All those in favor of acceptance of the OPEB actuarial report signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0.
Okay, the second actuary report is for the retirement fund. This was done by the actuary, Ed Fund Incorporated Actuaries, as opposed to Hooker and Holcomb. They, too, gave a presentation last Friday to the BET Budget Committee. It was an extensive demonstration of the impact of the negative investment returns on the retirement fund and how it affects the annual required contributions, also known as the ARC, A-R-C, in the future. This report was presented to the Retirement Board December 18th and approved on December 18th at their meeting. And I am before you tonight to ask the BET to accept this document also for filing with the town clerk.
Is there a motion to accept?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Simon, second by Mr. Mason. Once again, if you could just state for the public's consumption, what the number is looking like for next year when we deliberate the budget.
I believe, well, it depends on how bad the investment returns are. I mean, since December 18th, they've gotten actually worse. I think I've heard that it's the stock market decline has been 15% in the last 6 weeks or so. I think maybe you can help me. It could max out as much as $17 million, which could be a $10 million spike in the ARC for budgetary purposes between the 9-10 and 10-11 budgets.
So for purposes of why we keep on referring to this budget gap while we have one this year, why we're really looking forward and saying that it's definitely more than a one-year issue, that this is a several-year, potentially even a 36-month issue.
Yes, definitely.
Mr. Mason.
If I may add to that, during that presentation that we had an Eddie's presentation, majority of the BET members were there. The models were run in every configuration that I think we could offer, 25-year, 30-year, and it seems that the hit will be, I'm going to use Mr. Norton's number, $8.5 million additional to this year's projected $7.2 million, bringing us up, in the mid-teens. And that number being somewhat stable for at least 4 budgets after that? At least. So the Economic Times, the one thing in this budget that we've tried to reiterate is when it comes to the pensions, it'll be next year, that'll be a number that's, astronomical. I mean, that'll be a double.
Yep. Yes.
Of acceptance of the retirement report, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. I believe that concludes new business. Any other business to come before us? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Mr. Kelly? Thank you.